Even Holmes made one mistake, and it changed everything. Welcome to Fogg Casebook. I am your host, Vela. Where are you watching from? Your comments bring each mystery to life. Let's reopen the case. It has been my habit, when the press of my professional duties permitted, to set down the more singular of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes's exploits, and to submit them, with his reluctant consent, to that portion of the public which has shown itself kindly disposed to our adventures. Many a time have I recorded his triumphs with an admiration mingled with awe. On rarer occasions I have touched upon those instances in which defeat seemed to dog his steps, only that by some sudden illumination of his incomparable mind, confusion gave way to order, and the most tangled skein lay unknotted across his knee. Yet there is one episode which I have long hesitated to chronicle, not from any lack of interest, for it is as full of incident and character as any that ever passed within our little parlour at Baker Street, but because Holmes himself once said, in a tone I had never before heard from him, "My dear Watson, it was the first clue I ever missed." He laughed when he said it, to be sure, but it was the laughter of a man who observes on an autopsy table some overlooked lesion in a patient he might have saved. The incident, the reader will find, is no ordinary tale of theft or jealous rage. It began with an unanswered knock at our door and a singular absence, more singular perhaps than any presence could have been. It was in the damp close of a November evening that this curious business came upon us. A yellow fog had pressed itself like a coarse woolen muffler against the lamplights in Baker Street, so that their halos swam and dissolved in the murk. Holmes, his long limbs drawn up in the corner of the settee, was deep in a monograph upon the chemical indices of certain Venetian varnishes used in high-grade cabinet work of the last century. The fire, jealous of our meagre coal allowance, burned with a resentful glow, and Mrs. Hudson had retreated to her kitchen with those firm, suppressed footsteps of hers, which indicated that she blamed the weather for everything, and the lodgers for the rest. "It is astonishing, Watson," said Holmes without raising his eyes, "how often guilt chooses a Polish as well as a pretext. I recall a fellow who attempted to imitate the bloom of age upon an oaken chest merely by smoke and a rag. The fraud was tolerable to the eye, but to the nose, ah!" He tapped the page with a long, nicotine-stained finger. "Benzoin, an honest piece of oak would never endure it." "You would hang a man for his furniture?" I asked, smiling. "For his mendacity about his furniture," Holmes returned. "False surfaces, like false alibis, do not withstand heat." He stretched, cat-like, and the violin on the sideboard gave a little sympathetic thrumming. At that instant there came a knock. 3. Rap, rap, raps, brisk, emphatic, and curiously measured, as though the knuckles that delivered them were accustomed to turning pages at a lectern rather than handles in the street. Holmes's head turned slightly. "You will observe, Watson, the academic wrist," he murmured. "A scholar or a man long habituated to the cadence of argument. Pray admit him." I rose, but before I could reach the door there came a second sound, lighter, quicker, and directly upon the first. The faint click of our letter slit, a whisper of paper on brass, and then the brisk retreat of footsteps down the stair. When I opened, there was no visitor upon the landing, only the backwash of fog tumbling in from the hall, and the smell of damp wool. On the doormat lay an envelope of thick cream paper, oddly not sealed, but closed by a scarlet cord that had been wound about it and tucked in upon itself with fastidious care. "An epistle from Minerva delivered by Hermes," said Holmes. "Bring it, Watson." I placed it upon his knee. He unlooped the cord, and a single sheet slid into his hand. He glanced at the writing, and, for a fraction of a moment, a mere flicker, no more, his mouth tightened. Then he passed the letter to me without comment. The hand was a most delicate one, slanted and elegant, but the message itself consisted of only a few lines. Mr. Sherlock Holmes is implored to attend upon the undersigned at once, concerning a matter of the gravest urgency and honour. The housekeeper will admit you at any hour. Pray come before midnight. Fellow of St. Mark's, Cambridge, temporarily at 42 Belgrave Place. There was no date, but the postscript, light and almost hurried, had been added at the foot. My clock has lately behaved ill. If I am not below, you will find me in my study or the library. The matter allows no delay. Belgrave Place, I repeated, a man of means and of consequence if he be a fellow. You marked the injunction in before midnight. I noted it, said Holmes. As I noted the absence of any subject upon which we are to be consulted. Gravest urgency and honour, these are the sort of words men employ when they have compromised one for the sake of the other. He rose, and I saw, as I have often seen, the light kindle behind his eyes, a spark that no fire in the grate could imitate. Your hat, Watson, the air will do your circulation good, and bring the revolver. The revolver? A precaution. The fog is democratic. It envelops dukes and footpads with equal impartiality. We were upon the point of leaving when Mrs. Hudson appeared, flustered, and with a smut upon her cheek. Begging your pardon, Mr. Holmes, but a gentleman called, tall, with a severe sort of nose, and would have been shown up, only he said there was no need, as he had written. He seemed put out at not finding you, sir. More put out than he chose to show, Holmes murmured. You perceived his manner through the fog, Mrs. Hudson. You are developing observation. I perceive my doormat being used for messages, she said tartly, and retired. Holmes's lean figure slipped into his overcoat like a rapier into a scabbard. We made our way down the 13 steps and out into a street so shrouded that the lamps seemed to be little islands adrift in muffled seas. A cab, with that peculiar knack which London cabmen have of appearing, when most needed or least desired, loomed upon us with its horse's breath streaming like a locomotive. Belgrave Place, said Holmes to the driver, and a crown if you are there in 20 minutes. The man touched his hat. We rattled away, the wheels dull on the sodden pavement. As we drove, I could not help casting a glance now and then at my companion's profile, aquiline and composed against the fog-soaked window. He was not playing his fingers together, which is a sign of mental activity with him, nor had he fallen into one of those fits of impassive lethargy which presage some sudden feat of intellectual gymnastics. Instead, he sat very quiet and once, to my surprise, drew from his pocket the scarlet cord with which the note had been bound. The average man, he observed, holding it to the light, would see merely a string. The average inspector would see a string and suspect a woman, as if the one implied the other. You, Watson, will perhaps observe that the cord is silk, that it bears at one end the faintest trace of wax, and that the wax has been coloured with cochineal rather than vermilion. I confess, no, said I. I should have called it red and been done. Red is an imprecise creed, Holmes returned. Cochineal implies a preference and a purse. It is also brittle in cold. See where it has frayed. The fray is recent. Our correspondent tied and untied this within the hour, and out of doors. A nervous habit or a second thought. You surmise a lady. I surmise a mind that rehearses even its entrances. He slipped the cord back into his pocket. But we shall not speculate ourselves into error before we have something upon which to found it. Ah! We had drawn up before a house of sober, handsome aspect, with that air of polished discretion which the neighbourhood bestows on its fortunate inhabitants. The steps were swept, the brass bright, and yet the whole front had a curious, unoccupied look, as if the house held its breath. A carriage stood at a distance in the gloom. A gentleman's coat, glossy and black, showed for a moment in its interior, and then vanished as a door within the house was shut. Holmes rang. A moment later, the door was opened by a woman of middle years, neat as a pin, and with a mouth that had been trained to reserve. "Mr. Holmes, this way, sir. Dr. Watson, if you please." She led us through a hall hung with old maps, curiously, all of them of the Low Countries, and into a drawing-room which, though tastefully furnished, had the disorder of a place lately searched by someone careful not to leave a bruise. "Mr. P. are it?" asked Holmes. "In the library, sir," said the housekeeper, and only glanced, toward the ceiling. "He begged that you would not delay." "Has anything occurred since his note was sent?" The woman hesitated. "Only that the library door is locked, sir. That is unusual. Mr. Harrington is old-fashioned about locks. He keeps them for show rather than use. He said his clock was amiss this week, and the bell-pull in the library sticks. I am not to disturb him when he is with his papers." "Your name?" Holmes asked gently. "Bardsley, sir." "Mrs. or Miss?" "Mrs." "Then, Mrs. Bardsley, you will favour us by remaining here while we wait upon your master. Should anyone call, admit no one, upon no pretext whatever, until we return." He had already crossed the room and gained the corridor that led, by a few paces, to a door of dark walnut at the rear. From behind it, faint but insistent, came the muffled, irregular tick of a clock that was determined to assert itself by unseemly ways. Holmes bent and listened, his nostrils dilated a trifle. "There is a scent, Watson. You detect it." I sniffed obediently. "Books? Leather, lamp oil, perhaps. And something that offends those honest smells." He tapped lightly. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes." There was no answer. He tried the handle. It resisted. "Mrs. Bardsley, have you a key?" "No, sir. He keeps the library key on his chain." Holmes took from his pocket a small instrument case such as a surgeon might carry for the lesser operations. It had, more than once, made a locksmith redundant. "Stand back," he said, and set to work with a composure which, at such times, becomes almost impersonal. In a minute, the lock yielded with a tiny sigh. We entered together. The library was a fine apartment, high-ceilinged, its shelves a sober riot of calf and vellum. Upon the central table lay a confusion of papers, their edges weighted with a bronze of Erasmus that had been set on its side. A lamp burned low, its chimney smoked to greyness. The offending clock, a bracket timepiece of French make, tick-ticked with a jaunty insolence upon the mantel. Each beat seemed too quick by a hair's breadth, as if a nervous hand had set it to outpace the hour. But the master of the house did not rise to greet us. He sat in a leather chair near the fire, his head slightly bent, his hands resting upon the arms, too still altogether for a man in the act of composition. Between his shoes, at the very edge of the hearth, there was a small crescent of ash, such as a cheroot might leave, and upon the carpet, half concealed by the drape of the chair, a sliver of scarlet silk peeped like a tongue. Holmes moved forward, his gaze sweeping the room with that singular faculty of his, by which a dozen impressions seemed to settle in order as they arrived. He touched the man's wrist, then drew his fingers back and looked at them with a slight narrowing of the eyes. "Watson," said he very quietly, "we are, I fear, come too late." I bent to the task that my training required, but a glance told me all. The fellow of St. Mark's would not ring for his housekeeper again, and as I rose, my eyes were pulled by some trivial magnetism toward the bracket clock with its indecorous heartbeat. That and the sliver of scarlet, and a faint discoloration at the man's collar which I could not for the life of me name. These wrote themselves upon my memory as strongly as if a stylus had pricked them there. Holmes stood very still, his back to me, his attention fixed upon the mantel. After a long moment he said, with a strange softness, "Before midnight he begged us. Observe the clock, Watson." "It is fast," I ventured. "By what? 7 minutes?" "8.5," said Holmes. "And yet I wonder whether time has not run faster in this room than any clock can measure." He drew a breath, and his hand hovered for a second above the timepiece before falling to his side. Later, much later, when the affair had spent its fury, he would confess that there, in that quiet library with the fog flattening itself against the panes, he had failed to note at once the single thing which, had he seen it, might have spared a life and shortened our labours by days. But at that hour the case lay before us as blank as a new page, save for its curious ornaments, a letter tied with scarlet silk, a clock that lied to itself, and a dead scholar who had summoned Sherlock Holmes to keep an appointment with fate. Mrs. Bardsley had followed us only so far as the threshold, where she stood with that mixture of curiosity and dread common to conscientious servants. Holmes closed the library door behind us with a gentle click and moved with the spare economy of a surgeon preparing his instruments. He stooped first to the bracket clock, cocked a finger against its glass, and listened to the too quick beat as one listens to the breathing of a fevered child. Then, without touching the hands, he lowered his gaze to the mantel shelf, where a faint crescent smear marred the polish before the timepiece, as if some tremulous thumb had steadied itself there. "Important?" I whispered. "Everything is important until it is not," he murmured. "And nothing is unimportant until it is so." His eyes, which could be so cold, warmed for an instant with their peculiar light, and then drifted to the hearth. The ash between the toes of the dead man's boots was of a light, fibrous sort, such as a manila cheroot leaves. Near it, close to the skirting, lay the narrow tongue of scarlet silk that I had first observed. Holmes did not pick it up at once. He circled the chair, inhaled delicately at the back of the man's collar, and then glanced up at me. "The odour, Watson?" "Something sweetish," I ventured, uncertain. "I cannot place it." A contentious family among poisons claims that sweetness. Yet there is also lamp soot and stale leather here to confuse an honest nose. He drew the lamp up, shielding the chimney with his hand, so that the frail flame steadied. "You see the collar stud, discoloured, a trifle greened at the rim. Copper or brass often plays false with certain vapours when a man works long among them." "You suspect a chemical cause?" "I suspect the human habit of placing one's enemies within reach without the trouble of drawing a dagger." He bent at last and, with a thin blade from his case, lifted the scarlet sliver. It was of the same silk as the cord that had bound our summons, and its end showed a minute clot of wax, flattened on one side. Holmes held it to the lamp, then passed it across my palm. "Cochineal as before?" I said, eager to show that I had learned something from our drive. "Just so. And see the fray? A blunt blade or a hurried hand. Now our poor scholar." He laid 2 fingers delicately at the dead man's jaw and parted the lips a fraction. "No staining of the mucous membrane, tongue unbitten, pupils?" He lifted the lids, still, and let them fall. "Not pinpoint. We must not baptize every corpse with the same vial. Your verdict, doctor?" "Cardiac syncope, possibly provoked," I said. "But there is no froth, and no characteristic scent that I can swear to." "Then we shall swear to nothing. I am in agreement." He rose, moved to the windows, fastened, the day's condensation blooming like lichen upon the glass, and then to the writing table with its sprawl of papers, and the bronze Erasmus toppled as a doorstop might be. Among the foolscap lay a narrow knife of ivory with a steel core, the sort of paper cutter that will bite if abused. Holmes weighed it, turned it, and placed it down again precisely as he had found it. "There is dust everywhere except where there is not," he observed, almost to himself. He leaned and blew gently along the table's edge. A clean line appeared among the motes. A recent sweep by the sleeve of a man who leans with his left elbow. Observe the brush of fibres, and here. He indicated a square imprint where a book had lain, a quarto lately removed. "The shelf, Watson." I obeyed, scanning the ranks of calf-bound volumes. Many were in Latin and Dutch. The Low Countries maps in the hall had not misled us. In one gap, scarcely an inch wider than its neighbours, there remained a faint rectangle of undisturbed dust. Holmes crouched, drawing his finger along the vacant berth. A book kept near at hand is often a book in use, and a book removed under stress leaves a sharper shadow than one removed in leisure. We shall trouble Mrs. Bardsley for the catalogue. He returned to the mantel, where the clock ticked in its impudent canter. Without opening the case, he adjusted his head so that the firelight glossed the dial. "Note the minute hand, Watson, a faint, darker margin along the outer arc, grease or soot upon the finger that moved it, and the glass bears a hairline scratch near the 12. Someone advanced this clock with more haste than skill. Why should a man speed his time unless he wishes to dislocate another man's?" "An alibi," I suggested. "A common motive, and therefore suspect. But we shall keep it. Now the door." He examined the inner plate of the lock with a lens no bigger than a shilling. Fresh marks, but from my own toy, I confess. And yet, inside the keyhole, a glittering speck, see? A fragment of varnish, as if a key not born to this lock had galled it once before tonight. "Our scholar keeps locks for show," said the housekeeper. "It seems the show has ended." He straightened. "Come, Watson, let us put questions before answers as a man puts boots on before his spurs." At the door he paused, as if some half-thought had brushed him and gone. His hand hovered over the clock, hovered, then withdrew. He opened and called gently, "Mrs. Bardsley." She entered at once, hands tight together. "Sir?" "You will send for a constable and for a medical officer. Tell the constable that Mr. Lestrade of Scotland Yard is to be apprised that Sherlock Holmes requests his presence." He softened his tone. "And now your memory, Mrs. Bardsley, if you please. When did you last see your master alive?" "This afternoon at 5, sir. He took tea in here. The tray was put outside as usual. He did not ring again till 7 when he asked for a lamp. After that, only the note you received, I think." She glanced at the scarlet cord in Holmes's fingers. "He said a messenger would go out, sir." "A messenger went out," said Holmes, "and returned faster than any foot could compass. Did your master receive callers today?" "Only Mr. Valmont, sir, at 3:30. A foreign gentleman. He came last week as well. They spoke in the small parlour, not here." "Describe him." "Tall, very neat, a little grey at the temples. He smelt, if you will excuse me, of something sharp, like spirits of some sort, and he had a way of rubbing his thumb and forefinger together as if they were sticky." Holmes's eyes flickered. "And Mr. Arbaugh's habits? Did he smoke?" "Never in the library, sir. He would have my life if I let a cinder near the bindings." "Yet there is ash on his hearth-rug. Who else has the run of this room?" "No one, sir. Only me for the dusting, and that by his leave." "Your master's key always upon his chain? Always, sir. Holmes inclined his head. Then it is likely still there. He went to the body once more and drew a small ring of keys from the fob. One, of an old Gothic pattern, was larger than the rest. He tried it in the library door. It turned sweetly, with that little contented murmur of a lock used to its mate. "Thank you, Mrs. Bardsley. You have been of great service. One thing more. Has the bell pull in this room a trick of sticking?" "Yes, sir. The cord is frayed where it passes the pulley. Mr. Arade said he would have the man in New Bond Street see to it, but he never did." Holmes pulled it delicately. There was indeed a hitch and then a reluctant give. "Between an imperfect bell and an ill-behaved clock," he said, almost smiling, "a man could die of exasperation. You may send for the constable." When she had gone, he drew from his pocket the letter which had summoned us and laid its scarlet cord beside the sliver from the carpet. They matched as two halves of a thought. He held the envelope to the lamp. There was neither seal nor stamp. "Hand delivered," he said, "by the same nervous hand that tied, untied, and tied again." We heard then the distant rattle of a door and the mutter of a voice in the hall. Holmes lifted a finger. "The yard marches," he said. "Good. Before Lestrade darkens the air with certainties, let us inventory what we have. A man who abhorred ash leaves ash on his carpet, a clock that outruns the hour, a book removed in haste, a visitor who smells of laboratory spirits, and a door whose vanity locks were pressed, perhaps, to honest work." He stood very still. "And something else, something that does not fit, which I shall not dignify by naming until I have earned the right to it." "You think it murder, then?" "I think it not yet anything," he said, and the old, cool arrogance settled on him like his dressing-gown. "But if it be murder, it is murder performed by a mind that believes in the governance of small things. We shall therefore govern ours." He tapped the clock's glass with a fingernail so light that it made the faintest tick within a tick. 8½ minutes, Watson. Let us see by and by what a man might do with such a theft of time." The door opened, and Inspector Lestrade's sharp profile cut across the fog. Holmes's face, which had been meditative, became bland. "Ah, Lestrade," said he, as if welcoming a draught, "you arrive in the very nick, or 8½ minutes after it." Lestrade came bustling into the library with that air of professional certainty which often proved the greatest obstacle to his success. His keen eyes darted from the corpse in the chair to Holmes, then to me, as though he expected his arrival to banish all mystery in a single breath. The housekeeper had wisely withdrawn, and the sound of her quiet steps receded down the hall. "Well, Mr. Holmes," said Lestrade, rubbing his hands together, "I see you are already at work. Unfortunate business this, but it has the look of a straightforward case. Sudden failure of the heart, I should say. A scholar's life, sedentary habits, overwork, that sort of thing. No doubt your summons was meant to procure medical advice, but the poor fellow was struck down before you could arrive." Holmes regarded him with that infuriating calm which never failed to nettle the inspector. "Indeed, Lestrade, and the ash upon the hearth-rug? Shall we attribute that to scholarly overwork as well?" Lestrade bent, squinting. "A pipe, perhaps. These old bachelors often indulge a quiet smoke among their books." "Precisely so," Holmes returned, "save that this old bachelor was, by the housekeeper's testimony, most intolerant of ash in his library. A habit broken at the hour of death must be reckoned with." He turned aside and examined once more the small scrap of scarlet silk in his fingers, holding it delicately as though the faintest breath might scatter it. "You observed this, Watson? It matches the cord of the envelope." Yet why should part of it lie beneath the deceased's chair? Perhaps it dropped when he untied his note, Lestrade suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. Perhaps, Holmes echoed, his gaze unreadable. And perhaps not. The inspector frowned but said nothing. He busied himself instead with the body, bending to peer at the collar, the still hands, the slack jaw. "No sign of violence," he muttered. "No marks of struggle. The door was locked within, you say. Then how can we deny a natural end?" "Because," said Holmes, "the unnatural sometimes cloaks itself in the garb of nature. Consider the clock." He indicated the French bracket timepiece which ticked on with its hasty rhythm. "It is running 8.5 minutes fast. The hand has been moved with a greasy finger, leaving a faint smear along the margin. You may see the scratch upon the glass where haste betrayed steadiness. Someone wished this clock to speak falsely." Lestrade sniffed. "A trivial point. Clocks go awry of their own accord." "Not in this manner, and not, I think, in this house. Mr. R. noted its erratic conduct in his very letter. It suited another's purpose to hasten the hour." The inspector was silent, though he cast me a doubtful look, as if asking whether Holmes was not straining at gnats. For my part, I had long since learned that what seemed gnats to others were, in Holmes's eyes, dragons in disguise. Holmes moved to the writing table, lifted the fallen bronze Erasmus, and with the gentlest touch of his lens examined the scatter of papers. Our friend was interrupted in his work. Observe the neat stacks disordered, the dust swept in a single path. A book removed in haste, no doubt the one whose shadow remains upon the shelf. He straightened, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the lamplight. "Lestrade, I trust you will have this library searched carefully. Catalogue the contents and note any missing volumes. They may prove of more value than gold." "Books, Holmes?" The inspector's incredulity was palpable. "We have a dead man before us, and you chase volumes of Latin." Holmes only smiled faintly. "Murder, my dear fellow, is often less concerned with blood than with ink." Before Lestrade could respond, the door opened once more, and Mrs. Bardsley returned, pale but composed. "Beg pardon, sir," she said, addressing Holmes. "There was another caller today. I had forgot in the confusion. A lady came shortly after Mr. Valmont departed. She stayed but a few minutes and asked leave to send a note to my master. I did not see her face clearly, for she kept her veil drawn." Holmes turned sharply. "A lady? At what hour?" "Near 4 o'clock, sir." "And she left no name?" "None, sir, only the note." "The very note which summoned us." Holmes glanced at me, and I felt the thrill of connection leap between us. "You perceive, Watson, the cord, the scarlet silk. It is the lady's hand, and yet her visit preceded the letter we received. Curious, is it not?" "Extremely," I admitted. "But how do you know she herself delivered it?" "Because the envelope bore no stamp and was thrust through our slit within the hour. She wrote here, in this very house, under the roof of her victim or of her confederate." The revelation struck me forcibly. Lestrade looked more sceptical than ever, but he could not deny the logic. He rubbed his chin, plainly disconcerted. "Well, Mr. Holmes, if you are correct, we must find this lady. A neighbour may have marked her, or a cabman. I will set my men to it at once." "Do so," Holmes replied, though I detected a slight note of irony. "Yet take care not to alarm the bird before the net is drawn. She is cautious, that one. A woman who ties and unties her knots is a woman who measures her steps." While Lestrade grumbled his assent, Holmes stooped once more beside the body. His fingers traced the dead man's chain of keys, his waistcoat, the folds of his garments. At length he rose, his expression grave. "There is a shadow here, Watson. I cannot yet give it form, but it is darker than any we have seen." Something has escaped me, something plain. The first clue, perhaps, that ever slipped my grasp. His voice sank almost to a whisper. And until I seize it, the truth lies hidden. He broke off abruptly, his eyes narrowing. From the corridor came the faintest sound, a tread upon the stair, cautious, deliberate, as though one sought to descend unseen. Holmes motioned us to silence. In 3 strides he was at the door, his hand upon the knob, his ear pressed against the panel. The step faltered, ceased, then resumed with hurried force. "Quick, Watson! Lestrade! Someone leaves who has no business here." He flung the door open, and the 3 of us rushed into the hall. The lamps flickered in the draught, and the staircase plunged into shadow. Far below, we caught the blur of a figure already at the door, a gloved hand fumbling at the latch. "Stop!" Lestrade shouted, but the figure darted out into the fog, vanishing like a wraith into the heavy night. The street swallowed them whole. Only the muffled clatter of retreating boots bore witness to their passage. Holmes stood very still at the top of the stair, his face lit with that rare fire which danger kindled in him. "You see, Watson," he said softly, "our case is not of books alone. The living still walk among the dead, and they do not wait for us to find them." The fog clung to the pavement like damp wool, swallowing the fugitive before we had descended more than a flight. Lestrade, swearing under his breath, blundered down the steps in pursuit, his boots clattering like pistol shots in the night. Holmes, however, did not rush headlong. He paused at the door, listening, his eyes alive with concentration. A faint rhythm reached us, the echo of running feet diminishing quickly into the labyrinth of Belgravia's misty streets. Then came the clatter of a cab driven hard, the rattle of wheels receding, and silence returned, like the closing of a curtain. "Gone?" said Holmes, his tone flat. "A stage-managed exit, perfectly timed." He stepped out onto the steps, gazing into the murk as though it might yield its secret to his penetrating eyes. "Mark it, Watson. Our quarry had prepared every step, down to the cabman's rein in hand." Lestrade reappeared from the fog a moment later, his breath coming in angry gasps. "Lost him!" he cried, his face flushed with exertion. "Straight into a cab, and away like the devil himself. If only I'd had a man at the corner." Holmes's mouth curved in the ghost of a smile. "If only, indeed!" "But you did not, and he calculated for that. We have learned, at least, that our adversary is both careful and bold. Few men would lurk in the house of the dead, and fewer still would flee in such fashion while knowing pursuit inevitable. He counted on the fog as his ally, and it did not betray him." Lestrade struck the rail with his fist. "Well, Mr. Holmes, I'll flood the district with constables if I must. Every cab stand will be watched, every tavern questioned. We shall have him yet." "You may catch a dozen honest cabmen and 1 or 2 bewildered apprentices," Holmes replied mildly. "But the man himself will vanish like smoke. A net cast into the sea catches many fish, but not always the one you seek." He turned, drawing his coat close against the damp. "Let us return. There is still more to be learned inside than in the fog." We re-entered the library, the stillness settling about us once more. The body remained in its chair, the lamplight glinting faintly upon the scholar's spectacles. Holmes regarded him with a sombre detachment, then bent once again to the hearth. He traced the edge of the ash crescent with a penknife, lifting a fragment to his nose. "Not a pipe," he said at last, but a cheroot of manila leaf." "A visitor, then, for our late host detested smoking here." Lestrade, you will recall the housekeeper's mention of Mr. Valmont, a foreign gentleman who came at 3:30. She described him as smelling of laboratory spirits and with a curious habit of rubbing his fingers. Such a man is as likely to indulge in cheroots as any. You believe he is our fugitive? I asked. I believe he had no wish to be seen. That alone is suggestive. Holmes replaced the fragment and turned his gaze once more to the table. Observe, Watson, this inkstand. The level is low, the quill freshly cut, yet there is no blotter. Our scholar was interrupted mid-composition. His last written line will be of great interest. I bent eagerly, but Holmes raised a hand. Not yet. We disturb nothing until the yard has completed its survey. But we may look without touching. Do you see, just beneath the lamp, where a sheet lies crosswise upon the others, the edges curled, as if the pen had paused upon it? There lies his final word. We leaned, craning over the table. The script was neat, firm, the ink not yet wholly dry. It broke off suddenly in mid-sentence. And should this document fall into the wrong hands, it would imperil not merely my honour, but— Nothing more followed. The line ended abruptly, the pen stroke tailing into a blot that marred the paper like a drop of blood. Lestrade gave a low whistle. Now we're in it, sure enough. What document? Where is it? If that missing quarto contained it— Holmes's eyes gleamed. You are learning, Inspector. Yes, the missing volume may well conceal what he feared to lose, but observe further, he spoke of honour, not of wealth. The matter is one of reputation, perhaps of secrecy long held. A fellow of St. Mark's would not lightly pen such words. At that instant, a knock resounded upon the outer door, hurried and urgent. Mrs. Bardsley's voice carried faintly as she admitted someone. A moment later, a young constable appeared, helmet in hand, his cheeks ruddy from the night air. "Inspector, sir," he said, "a cabman has reported strange doings. Picked up a fare in Belgrave Place not 10 minutes gone. A tall gentleman with a foreign look. Gave directions in broken English, told him to drive fast to Waterloo Station. Then, halfway there, changed his mind and jumped out, disappearing down an alley. The cabman swears he was carrying a black leather case." Holmes's fingers drummed lightly upon the mantel. Waterloo, an old trick, to suggest flight abroad, and then slip away under cover of confusion. And a leather case, that, Watson, may be the very vessel of our missing document. Lestrade straightened. We'll have men at every exit of Waterloo within the quarter. He won't escape us this time. Holmes shook his head slightly. He's cleverer than you allow. A man who alters his course mid-journey has prepared a second refuge. But let him think himself safe for now. We must first understand what it is he carries, else we grasp the shadow and not the substance. He returned once more to the dead scholar. Look here, Watson. His watch chain. The fob bears the arms of St. Mark's College. Yet the watch itself is absent. A scholar of his habits would never be without it. Our visitor relieved him of it, perhaps as a keepsake, perhaps as a necessity. Why a necessity? I asked. Because, said Holmes, his eyes narrowing, a watch may conceal more than the hour. I have known men to hide letters in the case, or even a key. If Mr. R valued secrecy above his life, he may have trusted no place but his own pocket watch. That, I think, is why our fugitive risked so much to linger here after death had come. A silence fell between us, heavy with the weight of unseen consequences. Then Holmes spoke again, his voice low but resolute. Watson, mark this well. We stand not upon the threshold of a simple murder, but of a design that reaches further. Honour, a vanished document, a stolen watch, a clock moved to deceive, and a lady whose veil hides more than her face. Each piece lies before us, and somewhere among them is the first clue that I, yes, even I, have missed. Until I find it, the game is incomplete. Lestrade, impatient as ever, muttered something about wild geese and foreign spies, But Holmes had already turned away, his gaze fixed upon the shelves where the missing volume had once rested. His fingers brushed the gap almost tenderly, as though the absence itself spoke louder than the presence of the rest. "The quarto," he murmured, half to himself. "A book that was not merely read, but carried away. A book that may yet prove the key to all." He glanced at me then, and I saw in his eyes the glimmer of that fierce resolve which had so often guided us through darkness to the light. "We shall find it, Watson," he said softly. "And when we do, the silence of this room will speak." Holmes remained at the bookcase, his long fingers moving lightly over the spines as though their bindings were a keyboard upon which he played a silent chord. The lamplight glinted against the gilt letters, each title proclaiming some antiquarian subject in Latin, Dutch, or French. He paused at the vacant space where the missing quarto had been, running his nail along the dust-marked outline. "You see, Watson, the shadow is sharper here than elsewhere. The volume was lifted not a week ago nor yesterday, but within hours. That the dust should lie so cleanly means it was long in its place until a recent hand disturbed it. And consider, our man did not merely consult the book. He removed it entirely." Lestrade gave a derisive sniff. "A thief after books? I'd sooner believe in highwaymen who steal sermons. No, Mr. Holmes, your foreign gentleman bolted with papers of value. Money, perhaps. Government secrets, if you insist upon melodrama. But a dusty quarto, I'll not have it." Holmes regarded him with cool amusement. "And yet, Inspector, men have killed—"
"For less than a dusty quarto. For within its boards may lie a slip of parchment, a cipher, or even the very document of which our poor scholar wrote. If we dismiss what seems absurd, we shall never see the truth when it dons its plainest dress." I could not but admire the ease with which he spoke, though to my untrained eye the matter seemed as murky as the fog without. Still I remembered too well how Holmes had solved cases upon fragments as slight, and so I kept my silence. Holmes moved suddenly from the shelves to the desk, where he bent over the unfinished letter. With a quick movement he lifted the sheet and held it to the lamplight. "Ah, see, Watson, the back bears the faint impress of words written upon the page that lay above it. Observe how the fibres are scored." He drew a small glass from his pocket, wet the tip of his finger, and passed it gently across the surface. Under the sheen of moisture, the indentations became visible, a single phrase, hurriedly scrawled: "Valmont insists. Clock to be moved. Midnight." Lestrade gave a start. "Then it is murder. The fellow meant to tamper with the time, to create some alibi. Midnight! That explains your clock." Holmes smiled faintly. "You approach the truth, Inspector, though the path may yet twist. The hand that wrote this was our scholar's own, no doubt meant as a memorandum or warning to himself, but the note was covered, forgotten in haste, and never completed. He knew at least that Valmont intended some stratagem." "Then Valmont is our man," Lestrade declared triumphantly. "We have but to seize him, and all is done." Holmes raised a long forefinger. "Patience, Lestrade. Valmont may indeed be our adversary, but the presence of the veiled lady complicates matters. She wrote the letter that summoned us. Her cord matches the fragment by the chair. And she, too, was in the house this very afternoon. The case is a triangle, not a line." At that moment the door creaked, and Mrs. Bardsley appeared once more, twisting her hands nervously in her apron. "I beg your pardon, gentlemen, but there is something I had not thought to mention. This morning a parcel arrived for my master, delivered by a boy from a stationer in the Strand. He seemed put out that my master was not at home and left it with me. I set it in the library upon the side table." Holmes's eyes flashed. "A parcel? Where is it now?" She pointed timidly to a small mahogany table by the window. Upon it lay nothing but a faint square of dust. "It has been taken," Holmes said quietly. "Did you see the contents?" "No, sir. It was wrapped in brown paper, neatly tied." Holmes turned to us, his face grave. "Watson, do you not perceive? The quarto may have been but a cover for what that parcel contained. Our fugitive left with a case. I would wager it carried the parcel within, and the dead man's letter, if this document fall into the wrong hands, proves its peril." The inspector muttered an oath. "We must trace the stationer. The boy may know who ordered it." "Just so," Holmes said, "but not tonight. For now, we must preserve this chamber precisely as it stands. To disturb it further would be to scatter what little remains to us." He crossed once more to the bracket clock. With a sudden, decisive motion, he opened the case and examined the works. For several minutes he was silent, his sharp profile outlined against the flickering lamplight. At last he closed it again. "It is as I suspected. The mechanism bears scratches where a key has been turned too far, forcing the hand forward. Our visitor's clumsiness betrayed him." Then, to my astonishment, Holmes stooped and examined the carpet directly beneath the clock. There, scarcely visible to my eye, lay a tiny smear of something dark. He touched it with his finger, sniffed, and at once his expression sharpened. "Watson," he said quickly, "your medical eye, what do you make of this?" I bent, rubbed the stain between thumb and forefinger, and brought it near my nose. "Blood," I said. "Dried but recent, yet too slight for a wound of consequence." Holmes nodded. "Precisely, a prick. No more?" "A finger cut upon the glass, perhaps, but whose finger? Not our scholar's, for his hands are clean. Therefore it belongs to the intruder. And with that drop of blood he left behind the one trace he could not intend." Lestrade grunted. "A fine thing, a drop of blood in a house where a man lies dead. But will it serve us?" "It may serve us beyond your reckoning," Holmes answered coolly. "A man cannot rid himself so easily of a fresh cut. Bandages are scarce, gloves betray. Somewhere in London tonight is a tall gentleman, foreign in appearance, who conceals a wounded finger. Find him, and we hold the thread." The inspector muttered something about constables and patrols, then stalked away to give his orders. Holmes remained at the mantel, his eyes fixed upon the silent figure in the chair. "Watson," he said softly, "we stand at the threshold of a plot more intricate than any tale of romance. The scholar wrote of honour, the lady wrote of urgency, Valmont tampered with time itself, and yet, amid these signals, I sense a hidden music. A missing note eludes me still, the first clue I have ever missed. Until it is struck, the harmony cannot be resolved." He drew the scarlet silk once more from his pocket and wound it between his fingers, as though its threads might whisper the truth. Outside, the fog pressed heavily upon the windows, and the clock upon the mantel ticked its false beat, marking the minutes of a mystery that deepened with every stroke. Holmes stood silent for a time, his long fingers absently twisting the scarlet silk, his gaze fixed upon the fire, as though the shifting embers might order themselves into the pattern that eluded him. Lestrade's voice drifted faintly from the hall, where he marshalled his constables, but within the library there was only the ticking of the treacherous clock and the faint sigh of the fog at the window. At length Holmes stirred. "Watson, you perceive the cruel irony. The scholar sought our aid against some danger, but in calling us he furnished the means by which his enemy contrived to cloak his work. We are made players in a drama that was already written." "You speak as though we are too late," I said, unable to keep the discouragement from my voice. "Too late for the man, certainly, but not, I trust, for the truth. And truth, my dear fellow, has a way of surviving its victims." He paced to the desk again, his keen eyes taking in every detail. Suddenly he stooped and drew from the pile of papers a half-burnt scrap overlooked in the confusion. It bore a few lines of writing, jagged where the fire had bitten it. Conveyance must be discreet. The lady insists. Parcel to arrive unmarked. Holmes held it delicately with the forceps from his pocket-case. This confirms what Mrs. Bardsley told us. The parcel delivered this morning was arranged with the lady's intervention. She is no mere bystander, Watson. She directs the traffic of this mystery. I frowned. Then is she confederate with Valmont or his adversary? Both, perhaps, or neither. Men and women in such intrigues seldom keep to a single role. Today's ally becomes tomorrow's betrayer. We must not fix our categories too soon. He let the fragment fall into an envelope and sealed it carefully. Then, glancing once more at the body, he sighed. I have seen men strangled, shot, stabbed, poisoned. But here the hand of death is subtler, like the touch of a moth's wing. I can almost believe the man willed himself into stillness for fear of what he guarded. Yet the truth is less romantic, Watson. Somewhere in this room lies the instrument of his end, and I, candidly, have not yet found it. His admission startled me, for Holmes rarely confessed to bafflement. The firelight showed his aquiline profile set in lines of severity, as though he punished himself for the lapse. Then, with a sudden decision, he crossed to the door. Come, Watson, we must see the outer air before the yard makes a charnel house of this place. I would learn what the fog conceals. We stepped into the hall. Lestrade, already flushed with authority, turned at our approach. I've sent men to Waterloo and to scour the streets, he announced. We'll net your Valmont before the night is done. You needn't worry yourself further, Mr. Holmes. Scotland Yard can handle it from here. Holmes's smile was thin. I do not doubt it, Inspector. Only see that you handle the truth and not a convenient fiction. He brushed past without further word, and I followed him into the clammy night. The fog lay thick over Belgrave Place, muffling the clip of hooves and the call of newsboys. Holmes stood for several moments upon the steps, his eyes roaming the shadows with restless intensity. Then he descended quickly, circling the railings and stooping at intervals to examine the paving stones with his lantern. Twice he paused, muttering, then moved on again. At last, near the corner, he halted with a sharp exclamation. Watson, here! He pointed to the faint smear of something dark upon the stone, barely visible in the lamplight. I bent close. Blood again, I whispered. Just so. Our fugitive's wound bled here as he mounted the cab. And look further. The imprint of the case he carried, set down for an instant while he grasped the step. A small case, but heavy enough to leave its ghost. We know, then, that he bore the parcel away. Holmes straightened, his face taut with concentration. But why linger so long within the house after the deed? He might have fled at once, yet he remained until nearly discovered. Only one reason suffices. He searched for something more, the watch perhaps, or another paper hidden. Did he find it? That is what we must learn. We retraced our steps into the house, the air within warmer but no less oppressive. Holmes moved swiftly to the dead man, once more examining the chain where the watch had hung. He lifted the scholar's hand, scrutinized the nails, then released it with a shake of the head. Not here. But Watson, do you observe the hearthrug? The ash crescent we noted before, it is broader than a single cheroot might yield. I believe our intruder smoked more than once, lingering long enough to leave his signature twice upon the carpet. A man who smokes in such moments is either supremely confident or gravely agitated. He turned suddenly to the bell pull. Tugging it, he watched as it caught upon the frayed pulley. A poor substitute for a servant's step. Yet suppose our scholar, feeling himself in danger,
tried to summon aid. The cord jammed. His call went unanswered. Alone, he faced his visitor. The thought struck me with sudden force. Then he died while attempting to call for help. Holmes gave a sombre nod. So it would appear. And if his pen trailed off mid-sentence, it was because death intervened at that instant. But by what mechanism? There lies the riddle. As he spoke, Lestrade re-entered, his expression agitated. "Holmes! News from the station. A man answering Valmont's description was seen near the river, not at Waterloo. He dismissed his cab there, then vanished into the alleys by Blackfriars Bridge. He may be seeking passage on a vessel." Holmes's eyes kindled. "The river? Of course, a quicker road than the railway, and one less guarded, but he cannot leave at once. Tides and sailings are not so easily bent. He will lie hidden until the parcel can be conveyed abroad. We may yet intercept him." Lestrade's excitement was plain. "Then we must act at once. A cordon along the wharves, men stationed at every dock." Holmes held up a hand. "Not so fast. If you move too crudely, he will scent the net and vanish again. Better we watch and wait. The river has many mouths, but every tide must turn." He drew a deep breath, as though mastering his own impatience. "For tonight, Lestrade, you will keep men discreetly posted. I shall pursue another line of inquiry, for there is still a lady in this affair, veiled and urgent, who moves behind the stage. Find her, and we may learn the purpose of the play." Lestrade grumbled, but acquiesced, hurrying off to marshal his men. Holmes turned to me then, his voice low. "Watson, the night thickens about us. I have pursued many shadows, but here one slips always from my grasp. The first clue, plain, inevitable, yet I do not see it. I will not sleep until I do." He gathered his coat about him, extinguished the lantern, and with one last glance at the silent figure in the chair, he led the way out into the fog once more. The clock upon the mantel ticked behind us, its false beat mocking the hour, while in the distance the river sounded faintly, like a whisper of unseen depths calling us onward. The fog thickened as we descended from Belgrave Place, curling about the street lamps and muffling even the rattle of distant hansoms. Holmes strode rapidly, his coat gathered close, his eyes darting now and again into the shadows as though he expected the mist itself to yield its secrets. I followed in silence, sensing in him a restlessness I had seldom seen. It was not the fierce certainty with which he usually sprang upon a clue, but rather a taut impatience, as though some vital thread had slipped between his fingers and would not be recovered. At last he hailed a cab, and when we were seated, he leaned back with arms folded, his brows drawn. "Watson," he said suddenly, "did you mark the absurdity of our situation? We are asked to pursue a man whom we know only by description and habit, burdened with a parcel whose contents remain conjecture, and yet the true riddle lies not in his flight, but in the house we have left behind." "You believe the greater clue still lies within those walls?" "I am certain of it. Consider. A scholar writes of a document that imperils his honour. A foreigner arrives to press some demand upon him. A lady veiled, who arranges the delivery of a parcel, lingers only long enough to send a note. And the man is found dead, the clock falsified, the watch gone, and a quarto missing. These are not disparate accidents, Watson. They are parts of a design. And yet—" He struck his fist lightly against his knee. "And yet there is one element so obvious that I cannot name it. The first clue, as I told you, which has eluded me." The cab jolted to a halt at his sudden order to the driver. We alighted in the Strand, where the glow of shop windows pierced the fog. Holmes steered me swiftly toward a narrow establishment tucked between a printer and a tobacconist.
A painted board proclaimed it to be Armitage and Sons, stationers and booksellers. The bell jingled as we entered, and a young clerk started up from behind the counter. "You had a parcel delivered this morning to Mr. Fyke for Belgrave Place," Holmes said without preamble. "Describe the order." The youth blinked, then reached for a ledger. "Yes, sir. It was sent by request yesterday evening. A lady left instructions very particular. She asked that it be wrapped in plain brown with no marking and delivered by hand. She paid in coin, exact to the penny." Holmes leaned forward. "This lady, her appearance?" The clerk hesitated. "She was veiled, sir, and spoke softly, but I noticed her hands, fine, white, with a ring of unusual design, shaped like a serpent. It caught the gaslight." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Ah, a serpent. That is most instructive. Did she give a name?" "None, sir. Only said it was for the gentleman at Belgrave Place and urgent." "And the parcel itself, what did it contain?" The youth looked uncomfortable. "I cannot say with certainty, sir. It was already prepared when she brought it, about the size of a quarto volume, but rather heavier. When I asked whether it should be inscribed in our delivery book, she pressed me not to. I thought it odd, but, well, she paid well, and I thought no harm." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "You have done well to recall so much. One last question. Did she depart by cab?" "Yes, sir. A dark brougham waited at the corner." Holmes thanked him curtly, and we stepped once more into the night. His stride was purposeful, his face animated with suppressed excitement. "Watson, we have advanced. The lady arranges the parcel and conceals its passage. The foreigner demands the clock be moved. The scholar dies, and the case is carried away. Do you not see? The parcel itself must be the document of which he wrote. It is no mere book, but something weightier, more perilous." "And the serpent ring?" I asked. Holmes's lips pressed thin. "A symbol as old as Eden, and as treacherous. We shall see whether it denotes allegiance or vanity." We hailed another cab, this time to Scotland Yard, where Lestrade awaited us with his usual mixture of impatience and self-importance. He listened with ill-concealed irritation as Holmes recounted the stationer's tale. "A lady again!" he exclaimed. "Your stories grow more fanciful, Mr. Holmes. My men are sweeping the wharves even now. Valmont will be in our net by morning, and then your serpent-ringed woman will vanish like the fog." Holmes's eyes flashed, but he restrained his tongue. "Perhaps, Inspector. Yet nets that are cast too widely often break. You may snare a dozen river rogues and still miss the fish that swims straight beneath your nose. Meanwhile, I will follow another current." Lestrade muttered something about theatrical detectives and stalked away to issue his orders. Holmes, however, beckoned me aside. "Watson, we shall not waste the night in idle waiting. There is one man in London who may shed light upon Valmont's identity. He is a linguist of my acquaintance, Professor Sylvius, who has catalogued the accents of Europe as another man catalogues butterflies. If Valmont's speech is marked by a foreign cadence, Sylvius will know from what shore it sailed." It was close upon midnight when we reached the professor's lodgings in Bloomsbury, but the old scholar received Holmes with enthusiasm, his room strewn with books and the air heavy with tobacco. At Holmes's request, he listened intently as I repeated the housekeeper's description: the neat attire, the grey at the temples, the faint odour of spirits, the habit of rubbing finger and thumb. "Ah," cried Sylvius, "that trick of the fingers is common to those who work long with corrosive chemicals, etchers, dyers or alchemists. The accent you describe, clipped and deliberate, suggests the Walloon provinces of Belgium. I know of one man in London who fits both particulars. Henri Valmont, formerly of Liège, a chemist of some repute, dismissed under suspicion of misusing his laboratory for clandestine experiments. He has been connected more than once with societies of a dubious political cast." Holmes's eyes shone with satisfaction. "Your memory is invaluable, Professor. You have given flesh to a shadow. Valmont is indeed our man." We took our leave, and as we drove back through the silent streets, Holmes was unusually grave. "Watson, mark this well. If Valmont has allied himself with the lady, then the document they possess is no ordinary paper but a key to some scheme of international consequence. Honour was the scholar's word, yet honour, when imperilled, often veils secrets of state. I fear we are entangled in a matter that stretches far beyond Belgrave Place." The cab rattled on, the fog lifting slightly to reveal the dark outlines of the river. Holmes sat motionless, his fingers steepled, his gaze fixed upon the shadows where water met wharf. "There lies our next battlefield," he murmured. "By dawn, Watson, the river may give up its secret or swallow it forever." I shivered, though not from the cold, for in Holmes's voice I heard the rarest note of all, not triumph nor confidence, but the faint echo of doubt. The cab rattled on toward Baker Street, though Holmes gave no instruction to the driver. His face, faintly lit by the swinging lantern outside, was composed, but I recognized the tension of thought behind his half-closed eyes. He had sunk into that profound stillness which was less rest than the sharpening of a blade. I dared not intrude upon it, though the silence grew heavier with every jolt of the wheels. When at last we drew up before our rooms, he sprang lightly out and motioned me after him. The fire still glowed upon the hearth, and the familiar clutter of his experiments brought an odd sense of relief after the oppressive atmosphere of Belgrave Place. He lit the lamp, flung off his coat, and strode directly to the mantel where his chemical apparatus stood. "Watson," said he, "before the yard blunders into the river like a school of blind fish, we must test one more thread. Do you recall the faint odour about the scholar's collar? You judged it sweetish, but could not place it." "Indeed," I replied. It reminded me of certain syrups used in the surgery, though fainter. Holmes had already uncorked a phial, passing it beneath his own nostrils. "Prussic acid in a diluted form with a trace of almond. It is possible Valmont carried it upon his hands, and that our poor scholar inhaled enough to still the heart. Quick, silent, and leaving little mark an assassin's draught. Yet if so, why linger in the room? Why not flee at once?" He shook his head. No, something else held him there. He laid the phial aside and drew from his pocket the scrap of scarlet silk. "This, Watson, is the truer token. I have handled many knots in my time, but the manner in which this cord was tied, looped, untied, and retied, bespeaks a mind that rehearses its own actions. Our veiled lady is a strategist, not a pawn, and she, not Valmont, delivered the parcel that set this chain of events in motion. I could not restrain my curiosity. "Holmes, do you believe she and Valmont act together?" "That," he said slowly, "is the very question upon which the matter turns. If allied, then they seek the same end. If opposed, then one uses us against the other. In either case, she plays a role more dangerous than her silence admits. A serpent ring, Watson, not chosen idly." He fell silent, his long hands steepled, his eyes half-lidded. Then with a sudden decision, he rose. "We must test the yard's net. Come, back to the river." Once more we plunged into the fog-draped streets, this time toward Blackfriars. The lamps burned dim and scattered, their circles swallowed almost at once by the mist. At intervals we passed constables stationed upon corners, their shapes looming like phantoms in the gloom. Near the bridge a cluster of barges swayed, their lanterns glimmering red and gold upon the black water. Holmes paused, surveying the scene. "Valmont will not risk the larger wharves, too many eyes. He will seek a quieter berth, where a small vessel can slip with the tide. There are 3 such places within a mile. We shall begin at St. Saviour's Dock. We moved cautiously along the embankment, the river lapping below, the air rank with tar and refuse. At St. Saviour's a few solitary figures loitered by the warehouses, rough fellows whose muttered talk ceased as we passed. Holmes scrutinized each face, each gesture with hawk-like precision, but shook his head. "Not here. He's too prudent to mingle with common labourers. Come, Watson, down river." So we went, our footsteps echoing along the wet stones. The fog thickened, and the Thames lay like a sheet of tarnished metal, reflecting only the faintest smear of light. At length Holmes halted abruptly. Ahead, half hidden by the mist, a small wharf jutted into the water. Upon it stood a figure, tall and upright, the collar of his coat turned high. He was in the act of speaking to a boatman who held a rope at the prow of a dinghy. Holmes gripped my arm. "Our man. See how he guards the leather case at his side. Observe his posture. It is Valmont." We advanced softly, but at that instant Valmont turned, as though warned by some instinct. He uttered a sharp exclamation and sprang into the boat. The boatman pushed off with his pole, and in a moment they were gliding into the current. "After him!" I cried, but Holmes seized my sleeve. "No, Watson, the river is his ally tonight. We should be fools to pursue in this fog. He believes himself safe, and that will serve us better than any reckless chase." He stood watching as the boat melted into the murk, the faint splash of oars soon lost in the vast silence. After a long pause, he said quietly, "There remains the lady. She will not flee by river. She will remain, for she has yet a purpose unfulfilled. And it is she, I am convinced, who holds the first clue, the one I missed." We returned to Baker Street as the first pallor of dawn tinged the sky. Holmes refused food, instead pacing the room with that restless energy which always marked the height of his concentration. I had just sunk into a chair when Mrs. Hudson entered, with a card upon a tray. Holmes snatched it up and read, his brows lifting. "The game quickens, Watson. She comes to us of her own accord." The card bore no name, only the words, "The lady who called at Belgrave Place requests immediate audience with Mr. Sherlock Holmes, urgent and private." Holmes's eyes glittered. "She comes into the lion's den. We must be ready." A moment later, the door opened, and the veiled lady herself was shown in. She moved with poise, her figure tall and graceful, her garments of sober elegance. The veil concealed her features, but I glimpsed the pale line of her chin and the gleam of a ring upon her gloved hand. The serpent, unmistakable. Holmes bowed slightly. "Madam, you honour us. Will you not be seated?" Her voice, low but firm, carried an undercurrent of suppressed intensity. "Mr. Holmes, I have risked much in coming. Time is short, and danger presses on every side. What passed last night at Belgrave Place is but the shadow of a greater peril. If you value the peace of nations, you must act swiftly. The document must not cross the Channel." Holmes regarded her keenly, though his tone was smooth. "Then you admit that the parcel contained the document?" She hesitated, then inclined her head. "Yes, and it must not reach Valmont. He is ruthless, and in his hands it will work untold mischief, but I cannot trust the police nor the government. Only you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And why should I trust you, madam? You who delivered the parcel, you who summoned me too late to save the man who might have explained all." Her gloved hands clenched together. "Because," she whispered, "I did not foresee his death. I sought only to shield him. I delivered the parcel at his request, and when I learned Valmont pursued it, I turned to you. Do not mistake caution for guilt." Holmes studied her for a long moment, then inclined his head. "Very well. But understand this, I will not be your instrument in a game of hidden motives. If you would have my aid, you must tell me all." The lady's breath caught audibly behind her veil. At last she said, "Then I must begin with the truth. The man who died was not merely a fellow of St. Mark's, he was guardian of a secret treaty hidden these 20 years, which if published would shake Europe to its foundations, and now that treaty is in Valmont's hands." Holmes's eyes blazed with sudden fire. "Ah, Watson, now we touch the heart of it. Honour, indeed, honour of nations, and yet—" He leaned forward, his gaze riveted upon her. "Madam, there remains still the question of the first clue, the one which even I have missed. Tell me, if you can, what that clue may be." The lady's silence deepened the room, and though the fire crackled faintly, it seemed all of London held its breath as we awaited her answer. The lady's gloved hands tightened in her lap, the serpent ring gleaming faintly where the lamplight struck it. For a long moment she did not speak, and I could hear only the tick of the clock upon our mantel, steady and unhurried, so unlike the fevered instrument at Belgrave Place. Holmes sat forward in his chair, his fingers pressed together, his eyes fixed upon her with a concentration that seemed to strip away every layer of concealment. At last she spoke, her voice low, but each syllable distinct. "You ask of the clue, Mr. Holmes. I fear I cannot tell you what you missed, for I know not what it was, but I can tell you what he feared. The man you found in the library, he had long been the guardian of the treaty. He confided to me that others suspected its existence, Valmont foremost among them. He told me he had contrived a way of keeping it safe, hidden, yet always within his sight. When he spoke of it last, he said, 'It lies where no thief would look, but where time itself will guard it.' That is all he revealed." Holmes's brows lifted sharply, and for an instant I thought I saw a flash of revelation in his eyes. But he said nothing, merely tapping his long fingers together in rapid cadence. Then he asked quietly, "And you, madam? What is your stake in this affair? Are you kin, confidant, accomplice?" The lady drew a breath that trembled only slightly. "I am his niece. My uncle trusted me with much, though not with all. He believed that my presence in London would shield him, for who would suspect a woman? But I was not equal to his trust. When Valmont's agents pressed close, I thought to remove the danger by placing the treaty temporarily in my uncle's hands once more, under guise of a parcel from the stationer. It was folly. I gave the enemy his chance." Her words carried the ring of truth, yet I could not dismiss the unease her veiled figure inspired. Holmes, however, merely inclined his head. "You speak with candour. Whether it is the candour of innocence or of policy remains to be tested. But mark me, I shall hold you to it. One more question. Why summon me and not the authorities?" She raised her chin beneath the veil. "Because the police see only crimes, not causes. My uncle's death is a tragedy, but the loss of that document would be a calamity for nations. The police would blunder as they always do while Valmont slips through their fingers. I have read enough of your exploits, Mr. Holmes, to know that you alone see where others are blind." Holmes allowed himself the faintest of smiles. "Flattery, madam, is a dangerous instrument, but in this instance I will not quarrel with it. Very well. You have placed your case in my hands. I shall act, not for you, but for the truth. Remain in London within call, but reveal yourself to no one. Watson will escort you to a safe address where you may await further word." She rose with quiet dignity, bowed her veiled head, and departed. As the door closed behind her, Holmes sprang up and began pacing the room with swift strides. "Watson, it is clearer now. Time itself will guard it. Do you not see? The treaty was not in the parcel at all. It was hidden in the scholar's watch. The theft of that watch, and not the quarto, is the central act of this drama. The revelation burst upon me with the force of a thunderclap. I recalled Holmes's earlier suspicion, dismissed as conjecture. Now it seemed luminous in its certainty. "Then Valmont has it already," I cried. "Not so fast," Holmes returned. "Remember, he lingered in the library, searching, smoking, wasting precious moments. Had he found the treaty at once, he would have fled directly, not waited until nearly discovered. No, Watson, he left with the parcel, believing it to contain what he sought, and seized the watch only as an afterthought. He does not yet suspect its true value. That is the margin in which we must work." He halted suddenly, his eyes blazing. "And now you perceive what I missed. The first clue lay there in plain sight. Beneath the scholar's chain, I should have grasped it at once. The watch absent, the chain still dangling. Time itself. How blind I was, Watson. But we have it now." Before I could reply, the bell jangled below, and a moment later Lestrade burst into the sitting-room, his face flushed with excitement. "Holmes, we have news! My men tracked Valmont's boat to a wharf below Greenwich. They found the boatman, but Valmont had vanished ashore with his case. We've roused every station and dock, but he's slippery as an eel." Holmes regarded him with his usual composure. "You need not search the river further, Lestrade. Valmont carries the wrong prize. He has the parcel, yes, but the treaty lies elsewhere." Lestrade stared. "Elsewhere? Where then?" "In the watch of the dead man," Holmes said crisply. "It was taken last night, and until it is found, all your cordons are but nets cast into an empty sea. Put your men upon pawnbrokers, smugglers, and fences. Somewhere in London a foreigner will attempt to dispose of a timepiece he does not value. That is your man." The inspector's expression was half incredulous, half grudgingly respectful. "You're always spinning threads out of nothing, Holmes. But I'll set the watch list, so to speak. And if you're right, well, you'll have earned the credit this time." When he had gone, Holmes sank into his chair once more, exhaustion creeping over his lean features, but his eyes still burned within a fire. "Watson, the crisis sharpens. Valmont believes himself triumphant. The lady believes herself betrayed. Lestrade believes himself industrious. Only we know the truth, that the fate of a treaty rests in a watch. Before another night has passed, we must find it, or Europe may learn what it means when time itself betrays honor." I could find no words. The fog pressed close against the windows, the city muffled and vast beyond. The clock upon the mantel ticked steadily, each beat a reminder of the peril that moved with the hours. And beside the fire, Holmes leaned forward with that terrible intensity of his, the hunter's patience mingled with the certainty that the quarry was near, though still hidden in the maze. It was in such silence that many of our greatest adventures had reached their turning point, and I knew that within hours Holmes would either seize the heart of the mystery or be forced for the first time to admit defeat. Holmes rose from his chair with a sudden, almost violent energy, as though the quiet contemplation of the last hour had resolved itself into a single, driving course of action. He crossed to the window, flung back the curtain, and stared into the formless fog that pressed against the glass. The dim outline of Baker Street's lamps shone like blurred stars, and the muffled rattle of wheels drifted up from below. He stood thus for several moments, then turned to me with that familiar glint in his eye which always heralded decisive movement. "Watson, we have dallied long enough. Valmont believes he holds the treaty. The lady believes she has secured our aid. Lestrade believes he hunts with diligence. In truth, none of them holds more than shadows. The watch is the kernel of this nut, and until we crack it, all else is speculation. We must learn where Valmont carried it." I ventured a protest. "But, Holmes, If Valmont does not yet know the watch's value, he may already have discarded or hidden it. Precisely, Watson. And therein lies our hope. He is a chemist, accustomed to weighing substances, not secrets. He knows the worth of papers, but not of timepieces. He will treat it as plunder, not as prize. A man in flight, burdened with a case, will rid himself of trifles. Somewhere in this city, a pawnbroker or a fence will be offered a scholar's watch. We must move before it vanishes beyond recall. Even as he spoke, a rap at the door announced the return of Lestrade. He looked wearied, his coat damp with fog, but his manner betrayed suppressed triumph. Holmes, we've had word already. A pawnbroker in Clerkenwell reports that late last night a foreign-looking fellow, hand-bandaged, attempted to sell him a gold watch with the arms of St. Mark's upon the fob. The man offered too little explanation, and the broker, suspicious, declined the bargain. The fellow grew agitated and hurried away, but not before the shopman noted his direction, toward Farringdon Street. Holmes's eyes flashed. "Excellent! At last the tide turns. You see, Watson, the net tightens not by force, but by patience. Inspector, we must visit this pawnbroker at once. Every hour lost is an hour for Valmont to mend his error." Within a quarter of an hour we were rattling through the streets, the cab wheels splashing through the wet. The fog had thinned slightly, revealing the silhouettes of gas lamps and the huddled shapes of market carts preparing for dawn. The pawnbroker, a sharp-nosed fellow with ferret eyes, admitted us eagerly. Yes, the watch had been offered. Yes, he had recognized the college crest and refused it. Yes, the man had indeed worn a crude bandage upon his right hand. Holmes questioned him minutely, noting every word, then turned to Lestrade. "There is no doubt. Valmont has the watch, though he does not know its value. He will attempt another broker, perhaps one less scrupulous. Place your men discreetly among the pawnbrokers of the East End. The fellow is too cautious to return to Clerkenwell, but he will not venture far. His hand betrays him. Remember that." We returned to the cab, Holmes deep in thought. At last he spoke. "Watson, the watch holds the treaty. Of that I am now certain. It was a hiding-place of singular ingenuity. Think, a man who distrusts locks, who believes clocks err, who mistrusts bells. What better irony than that he should entrust Europe's honour to the one instrument that marks time faithfully in his own pocket, and I, blind fool, did not see it at once." He fell silent, his mood dark. I knew better than to attempt comfort. His mind moved with ruthless honesty, sparing itself no reproach. When he looked up again, the fire had returned. "But the end is not yet written. Valmont will surface again, and when he does, we must be waiting." It was nearing 8 o'clock when we reached Baker Street once more. Holmes had scarcely removed his coat when the bell rang, and Mrs. Hudson admitted a constable bearing a sealed note. Lestrade tore it open and read aloud. "Foreign gentleman, tall, grey at the temples, seen entering lodging-house in East Cheap with small case. Hand bandaged. Pawnbroker nearby confirms attempted sale of gold watch. Await instructions." Holmes sprang to his feet. "The trap closes. Lestrade, post your men at the exits. Watson and I shall accompany you, but mark me, no blundering. This is not a common thief to be dragged from his bed. We must see how he plays his last card." The cab hurried us through the waking city, the markets already clamorous with cries, the fog lifting in reluctant tatters. Eastcheap lay crowded with warehouses and lodging-houses for sailors. At the corner of a narrow lane the constables awaited us, tense and eager. Holmes surveyed the house in question, a grimy building with broken shutters, its door sagging on rusted hinges. "He chooses well," Holmes murmured. "A place of transience where no questions are asked. Yet even here the river calls him. He will not tarry long." Lestrade whispered an order, and two men stole round to the rear. Holmes laid a hand upon his arm. "No violence unless forced. We want the watch, not the corpse. Let me lead." We mounted the steps and pushed open the door. The interior reeked of damp and stale tobacco. A surly landlord pointed wordlessly to the upper floor. Holmes ascended swiftly, I close at his side, my revolver in hand. At the end of a narrow passage, a door stood ajar. From within came the faint scrape of metal, as though a tool worked against some delicate mechanism. Holmes motioned for silence. We crept forward, and peering through the gap, I beheld Valmont himself. He sat at a small table, the scholar's watch held in a vice, his bandaged hand awkwardly guiding a thin blade as he prized at the case. His face, pale and lined, was set in fierce concentration. Beside him lay the leather case, open and empty, the rejected parcel. Holmes flung the door wide. "Your hand, Valmont, betrays you more surely than any accomplice." The man leapt to his feet with a cry, the blade flashing. For a moment it seemed he would strike, but seeing the revolver levelled in my grasp and the constables crowding in behind, he let the tool clatter to the floor, his eyes, dark with hatred, fixed upon Holmes. "You meddle where nations tremble, monsieur. You do not know what you seize." "On the contrary," Holmes returned coolly, stepping forward to snatch up the watch. "It is you who do not know. You sought a treaty in a parcel, when all the while it ticked against your victim's heart. And now, Valmont, it ticks no more for you." Lestrade clapped the irons upon him, and the man submitted with a bitter laugh. Holmes turned the watch delicately in his hands, then pressed a hidden spring. The back opened, revealing within a folded slip of parchment, yellowed with age yet intact. "The treaty," Holmes murmured, his eyes glittering. "Safe at last! Time has indeed kept faith where men failed." We returned to Baker Street with our prize, the city stirring into full life about us. Holmes placed the watch upon the mantel, beside the honest clock that marked the hour. For a long time he stood gazing at it, silent. At last he spoke, his tone softer than I had ever heard. "Watson, I told you this was the first clue I ever missed, and so it was. Yet perhaps it was meant to be that I might learn humility. Even the keenest eye must sometimes be blind, and the simplest truth lie hidden in plain sight." He sank into his chair, drew his violin into his hands, and sent a low, contemplative strain into the morning air. And I, watching him, felt once more that mingling of awe and affection which no man who knew Sherlock Holmes could ever escape, for though he might falter, his genius always rose again, triumphant over shadow. The treaty, once secured, was conveyed by Lestrade with all the ceremony the Yard could muster, though I had no doubt the government would take the lion's share of credit, leaving Holmes's name unspoken in the annals. Holmes himself cared little. He placed the recovered document in Lestrade's hands as indifferently as if it had been a common pawn ticket, though I, knowing what storms it might have loosed upon Europe, could scarcely withhold my admiration. Valmont, when brought before the magistrate, maintained a stony silence. His features betrayed no regret, only that bitter disdain which so often masks the collapse of a cunning design. The lady, for her part, was kept under Holmes's watchful eye until her innocence was assured. She came to us once more, unveiled, her countenance pale but resolute, to thank Holmes with a dignity that touched even his iron composure. "You will forgive me," she said, "if my caution seemed deceit. My uncle trusted me, but I lacked his courage. I shall live with that reproach always." Holmes bowed with grave courtesy. "Madam, reproach is for those who fail knowingly. You acted from loyalty, and if your hand trembled, it was because you felt the weight of more than your share. The honour of nations is a heavy burden." When she had gone, I remarked upon the curious gentleness of his words. Holmes smiled faintly. "Women, Watson, are like the veils they wear. It is seldom wise to tear them aside, better to lift them with care and see what lies beneath. In her case, it was fidelity, though tinged with fear." We sat together in our familiar chairs that evening, the fog pressing as ever against the panes, though to me it seemed less oppressive than on that night of our summons. The watch lay upon the mantel, its fob gleaming faintly in the firelight. Holmes had closed it again, and its tick was steady, faithful, a gentle reminder of the secret it had borne. "You see, Watson," he said at length, "it was there from the first, the absent watch, the scholar's phrase about time itself, guarding his charge, plain as daylight. And yet I, vaunted master of deduction, passed it by. I said to you once that it was the first clue I ever missed, and so it shall remain, though happily without lasting harm." I could not help protesting. "But you solved it, Holmes. None but you could have followed the thread through such a maze of falsehoods and misdirections." He shook his head. "We arrived, Watson, not by brilliance, but by perseverance. Let it be a lesson, to you, perhaps, but chiefly to me, that even the keenest reasoner may overlook the obvious when dazzled by the unusual. A watch upon a chain, a clock upon a mantel, simple instruments, yet capable of deceiving even Sherlock Holmes." He drew his violin across his knee and touched the strings lightly, coaxing from them a note that seemed half a sigh, half a benediction. "The world will move on, treaties signed and broken, nations trembling upon the turn of words. But here, in our small corner of Baker Street, the lesson is written in time and in silence. Never despise the commonplace. It is often the surest key." I watched him then, the firelight upon his angular features, and felt again that mingled awe and affection which his genius inspired. For all his cold logic, his mind burned with a passion for truth that few men could match. And though he might mock his own oversight, I knew that London, and perhaps all Europe, owed its quiet morning to the vigilance of Sherlock Holmes. Thus ended the case of the first clue Holmes ever missed, and though the papers spoke only of Scotland Yard's diligence and the vigilance of the Foreign Office, I knew, and I record here, that it was in truth the mind of my friend which had saved us from calamity. He himself dismissed it with characteristic irony, declaring that the only lesson he had drawn was never to trust a clock, whether on a mantel or in a man's pocket. Yet for me it remained another chapter in the long chronicle of his triumphs, and perhaps the most human of them all. For if Holmes, in all his brilliance, could confess to error, and yet pursue the truth with undiminished resolve, then surely there was hope for us lesser mortals who stumbled in his shadow. And so, as he bent once more to his violin, I set down the notes of the case, that others might read and marvel, and know, as I have always known, that Sherlock Holmes, even when he missed a clue, never failed in his duty to justice.